lovers, and welcome. I want to start off by saying I am so blessed to be in a position to suggest tips and tools and even products that can help you lead a tantric life of liberation and expansion. And one of my absolute favorite places to purchase spiritual and sexy items is Wands. Wands.com, spelled Wands. Wands sells, you guessed it, crystal pleasure wands, along with so much more, including yoni eggs, free bleed blankets, other amazing products for yoni steaming. I've been using these products and products similar to them for the better part of a decade, and they have been incredible allies in my journey of sexual healing and expanding my orgasmic potential. And I'm so grateful to be friends with the owner, Courtney. She's amazing. She has so generously provided us all with a discount code for 15% off, and that code is Leola. Leola. You can use it on their website, www.wands.com. Again, the code is Leola, Leola, for 15% off. I'll also make sure that this is linked in the show notes. So thank you for listening, and you're welcome for the inevitable pleasure and healing that is coming your way with these products. Now, let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome to Talk Tantra to Me. It is such an honor to be holding space for this divine knowledge to make its way into your ears and lifestyle. Today, I talk Tantra with Dr. Nisha. She is author of Return to Center, East Meets West Medicine, an integrative medical guide to healing. I am so excited to have Dr. Nisha back on the podcast. She came on the podcast about a year ago when we talked about the confluence of Ayurveda and Tantra and working with life force energy and vitality and becoming just so juicy in your radiance and adjusting your relationship to your body and to your diet in a way that's going to be supportive to living a tantric lifestyle. But today we're here to talk more about her book, which includes some of those things and also lots of other really juicy topics. And I also just want to highlight, like, Nisha's my homie. She's one of my close friends. We're kind of a part of this like beautiful women's group here in Austin, which so beautifully has I think half of the women in our group are authors now, which is really beautiful and exciting. And I just love doing life with you. I love seeing how you so immaculately take care of your body and nourish your body and treat your body like a temple and also celebrate your body. I love the way that you adorn your body and move your body. And I just want to highlight for the listeners, Nisha is living a tantric lifestyle. She is walking the talk. And I'm so excited that she also gets to integrate with us this East meets West medicine piece. And maybe we can start off there, Nisha, just sharing a little bit more about your background. Excuse me, just drinking a bubbly water. Maybe we can share a little bit about your background and what qualifies you to write a book like this.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for that amazing welcome. I feel the same way about you. So precious. So I started my journey as an MD, and I worked in hospitals and clinics for several years and really wanted to be able to offer patients a type of medicine that I would actually practice on myself and use myself. And so I had been studying Ayurveda and practicing it on myself since age 16, actually. And so I just took time off being a doctor and I went back to school, studied Ayurveda, and then from there, functional medicine. And then really have just been integrating the two modalities since, working with patients, really seeing how these principles can be combined and applied to real life patients and help real life diagnoses in a way that just was not even fathomable as an MD. There was so much that we just gave prescriptions for or had no idea what the cause was. And to be able to offer or just learn a framework that could get to a root cause is such a gift. It's such a blessing. And so my purpose with this book is to offer that to the world, to people I'll never meet, to people that hopefully read the book and see how these principles can be applied to their lives and change them for the better, and get just even the glimpse of a few things that you can do that will be so significant in changing the course of your health and well-being. Because how can we live our greatest tantric lifestyle if we don't feel good in our body? And so that's my mission with this book.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for giving us a little bit more of a background and the mission of the book specifically. And yeah, I have such a vision of people reading this book and seeing evidence of a new way of interacting with their bodies and their health, and like finally having some peace as well. Like what I loved about your book, and I have the book, got it ahead of time. There's so many amazing case studies in the book, like little stories that you share of the transformations that you've seen your clients go through. And I think that it's so powerful and relatable, and like there's so many ailments in there that we're familiar with, that we might even think that there's like no way possible that someone could have relief, and you've brought that to people, or you've helped them heal themselves. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about like the structure of the book and the things that you think specifically my audience would be like especially jazzed about.
Yeah, that's great. So the book structure is actually so interesting because, well, to me, it's very interesting because it follows Ayurvedic anatomy. And most people who have a familiarity with Ayurveda know the doshas, and they know a little bit about their constitution and how to keep it in balance and the seasons. But the kind of deeper cut of Ayurveda and the knowledge of Ayurvedic anatomy and the tissues and how disease actually progresses through the body. It starts in the gut and how it moves through the different tissues is usually not something that people have exposure to. And so that is something I was so excited to bring to more people, because when you know the pathway that disease takes, you know how to bring it back, you know how to reverse it. And so the book is structured in terms of exactly that journey that disease takes. So it starts in the center. So we begin with the first 3 chapters on things that you can do kind of universally across the board that are going to be super supportive to your health, to your gut. And then we move away from the center and we move through circulation and then to the deeper tissues. And so so each chapter is dedicated to a tissue and how to balance it. And it's very user friendly. There's key points at the end of each chapter in a color coded box. So quick reference on what you can do to support that tissue. And I think what would be most exciting to your audience is the last chapter, which is all about the Artava Dhatu, Shukra and Artava, which are the female and male reproductive systems, respectively. And what's so interesting about this tissue is that it's almost like your report card of your whole body. So it's the last tissue to be nourished. And so it informs you as to the nourishment of each preceding tissue. And if you have a problem with sex hormones or libido or orgasm or desire, it's not just isolated to that tissue. It is in all of the deeper tissues. You can find some root that needs to be addressed to have the fullest experience in the last tissue. And so it really is a full body book. And I think sexual healing and sensuality are a full body experience. It's not just your pelvis. And so I think understanding how that the female and male reproductive system integrate with the whole body would be really exciting to the audience.
Yeah, let's definitely go deeper with that. And I just so with that piece, what I'm hearing is that this last bit that is nourished is related to the sexuality, which makes sense because if you think about it, it's like you really shouldn't, quote unquote, it's not ideal to reproduce, right? Or to procreate unless you're fully nourished. So it makes sense that this would be the last piece because it's like, let's get everything else lined up so that then you are set to procreate. But obviously we're not all having sex just to procreate. And I'm wondering if it trickles backwards too. Like if you nourish your sexuality or you nourish this piece, is there a show in Ayurveda that it can like nourish the other pieces or not so much, out of curiosity?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. And it's not one that I thought of before, but as you bring that up, there is this quality in Ayurveda called ojas. Have you heard that word before?
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
It's 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 like I think the modern equivalent probably is mojo. It kind of sounds similar, ojas, mojo, similar word structure. And so essentially ojas is what is created when your reproductive tissue is healthy. And if you think about the pathway of nourishment, it takes 40 days to make ojas. And this is really interesting because it takes that long in your postpartum phase to rebuild the body so that you can be fully nourished. And so there is this magic 40 days that appears in Ayurveda too in terms of creating ojas. And ojas supports your heart, not in a physical way, but it like deeply nourishes just the pulse in your heart. It's almost like what gives your heart the energy to beat. And there is a quick way to make ojas other than going through the 40-day food pathway. And that's when you feel truly inspired and you feel almost like that full body chills kind of experience when you feel magic. And that can come in different forms. I remember for me, I felt it the first time when I heard this like beautiful, deep female voice chanting some sacred hymns. And I had that full body chill experience. And then I was like, second thought was, I'm making ojas right now. And so yes, if you have more experiences that create ojas, that's the ultimate kind of substance of nourishment. So it will feed back on your whole system.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It to me, Ojaz is like turned on by life, which is like one of my key phrases. So fascinating. I also loved what you were sharing about like how the nourishment or like how like there's pathways to illness and like it reminded me a lot of when I've had, I used to have chronic UTIs or chronic bladder pain and when I finally worked with it wasn't someone that was doing Ayurveda, but they were in a similar, Eastern modality. And they basically tracked that it was all starting at my liver, which is like so much further up the system. And it was so interesting. And so I did, some liver cleanses and some other work and haven't had any issues since then. And so it's really fascinating like how those pathways start. But that's not something that in most Western medicine, I would go in with like UTI symptoms. They'd give me an antibiotic that would wreck my gut, which is, the start of everything, as you said. And then and that was my life for like, probably like 10 years was like this cycle of like going in for more antibiotics. And then like it never really got to the root piece until much later in my life. So it's really fascinating, all that stuff. I don't know if you have anything to add on that or if you'd like to go deeper in the other piece.
Yeah, that's amazing that you had that experience and you had the gift of working with someone who could understand it as something that would respond to liver support. And that parallels in Ayurveda too, because I see, or Ayurveda sees UTIs as a pitta disorder. So essentially too much heat. And this is something I cover in the book is where the roots of each pathway of disease are. And so pitta's roots are in the spleen and liver. So the blood tissue, which is the second tissue to be nourished, lymph is first, then blood. So the blood tissue, which is called rakta dhatu, its roots are in the liver and spleen. So if you want to address the blood, which is filtering through the whole system and comes out in the urine, you address the liver and the spleen. And the liver is a lot more easy to address than the spleen. So the liver is the way we go. And so my mind thinks that way when I'm thinking of pitta disorders. And actually, in the book, I talk about a patient who I worked with who has eczema, and we did a lot of liver cleansing. We did all kinds of deep liver cleansing, and she transformed her skin within 3 months, and it was a pretty miraculous result. But unless you could really see it in terms of the framework of how is the blood tissue, where is it rooted, what is the pathway that it takes through the body, and what are its outlets, you wouldn't be able to get to that deep root. And so root cause healing to me is not just go to a functional medicine doctor and work on your microbiome, which is important. It's being able to understand how disease is actually rooted in each tissue.
Yeah, that's so, so fascinating. And for those that are listening and are like hearing doshas and pitta and like all of that stuff, Ayurveda, you have a quiz, right, for people to figure out more about their body type and where they might have a excess of energy or an imbalance, right?
Yes. I definitely do. And what I love about this particular quiz, because there's a lot of different quizzes out there, is that it separates out what your innate constitution is and what your current state is, what your current imbalance is. And it's not enough to know what your propensities are when you're not feeling well. You need to know what the actual imbalance is so that you can do something about it and bring yourself back into balance. And so the quiz shares that information, breaks it down for you, and then also gives you some tips on what you can do to bring it back into balance.
And then the book just takes you that much deeper.
Yeah, I like that I cover kind of the essential key concepts early on so that I can take the reader deeper. That was my desire, is not to just to write another Ayurveda book, was to write something that would be really clinically helpful to people so that they can get a sense of their own bodies and how to bring them back in balance.
Yeah, and I'll say like this is like a textbook, but it's also not, in that it's so easy to read and it's also so beautifully done. Like the book in of itself is a work of art. You have your art, your art that you created sprinkled throughout, and then the design is like it's so well done. It's very well done.
Thanks. I put my heart and soul into it, like it was like a passion project, and it didn't feel like work, not the writing of it, not the editing, not the creating in any aspect. It really just felt like joy and my gift. And so I think that translates in both the reading but also the visuals. And I wanted to create a book that people would want to leave out on their coffee table and be beautiful. But I also wanted it to be super informative and activating. So yeah, thank you for reflecting that.
Yeah, it definitely does all of that. And then the quiz, they can just find. We'll have your website and your bio. They can find it there, or is there a special place to get the quiz?
Well, you can access it through my Instagram, which is just Nisha Khanna MD. And then it's also linked in the book. So there's a QR code at the back of the book, and you
Oh,
can
great.
link it there.
Okay, amazing. And all the books on Amazon, we'll also link all that in the show notes. We're like jumping ahead a bit, but I just like while people are curious about the quiz, I wanted to drop that place to find it right here. Yeah, I'd love to go into more about the what was the sensual sexual tissue? What is all of that about? Can we go deeper into that?
Yeah, so that's called Ardhava Dhatu. And yeah, Dhatu means tissue, Arthava is the female reproductive system. And so that chapter covers everything from how to have no PMS to things like endometriosis and PCOS and menopause and hormone replacement for perimenopausal and menopausal women. So it really spans the the whole chronology of a teen to a wise woman, and really gives kind of key things that I found to be helpful in my practice. I do work with prescriptions, being an MD, and so I work with prescriptions and herbs and supplements and food. And so each pathology, each diagnosis has a very holistic approach. And I even weave in some energy modalities into some of my patients, like acupressure and quantum healing. So it really is, like, to me, a very integrative approach, and being able to see visually how that actually translates to a patient and their diagnosis. And so that chapter is really rich. And yeah, and there's a lot there. If even if you don't have that particular condition, just being able to see how I unravel disease and relate it back to the other concepts that have been explained in the book. Mm-hmm. I think anybody would be able to really get a lot from that.
Yeah. And do you have a male or masculine version of that chapter in the book as well?
Yes, it's primarily dedicated to women, and then the last section is dedicated to men. And I cover it in terms of what we call andropause. So we have menopause for women, and then andropause is the waning testosterone levels, and how that can be addressed.
Oh, interesting. I'm curious how you address that in your work, in your line of work, which, by the way, I think that it's really refreshing to meet with someone that's in Eastern medicine that still, will prescribe prescriptions and can see the value in, depending on the condition, looks at it holistically. And I've seen you actually, like, heal and support, the women in our sisterhood in so many different ways, and more Eastern ways and more Western ways. So, but yeah, I'm curious about the testosterone level piece, because it's something that I've heard coming up a lot. I think that, like, Joe Rogan is talking about it. Like, my husband is in his early 40s and has thought about, yeah, I'm gonna, like, eventually start TRT or whatever. And some of the other people in my community. So I'm just curious, and I have quite a few male listeners. I'm curious to hear your download on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is probably the most important for men is to manage their belly fat when it comes to testosterone levels, because fat tissue makes estrogen. And essentially, you've got this pool of hormones: estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. And it's not the absolute number of any hormone, it's the relative number of each hormone in comparison to the next. And so the more men can do to increase their muscle mass and decrease their fat body mass, they will naturally have better testosterone levels. But that it's, again, not something that's in isolation, that is just going to be like, oh, I'm going to take testosterone replacement. The men that I've worked with that do the best and have naturally just really robust testosterone levels are taking care of everything before that. They're taking care of their gut health, they're taking care of their sleep, and their stress levels. One of the things that I think is really beautifully explained through the lens of Ayurveda is the tissue that precedes reproductive tissue is the nervous system. And so the nervous system is responsible for nourishing the reproductive tissue. It's almost like an irrigation system that starts in the lymph, and every subsequent tissue takes a little bit of that nourishment. So the nervous system takes what it needs, but then if it's not deeply nourished, it has nothing to give to the reproductive tissue. And so this is something I see in both men and women, is they're so overworked, they're so stressed out, they're multitasking their whole life, and there's not enough juice to nourish the reproductive tissue, and that can lead to infertility for both men and women. But even if you think about it in terms of erectile dysfunction, which for the most part has a huge psychological component, that psychology is actually coming from the nervous system. It's the anxiety that's revved up that is preventing the reproductive tissue from doing its job, from functioning normally. And so I see it as weaved through all of the pathways that precede it. And I do know men who are in their early 50s who have amazing testosterone levels, the levels of, like a 20 or early 30-year-old. And they're doing all the things that I've mentioned to support that. And I think that in our society these days, I am seeing men in clinics come in their early 30s, mid 30s, early 40s, wanting testosterone replacement, and they do indeed have low levels, but it's like they haven't worked on anything else that precedes it, and it's almost like doing the patient a disservice to just give a testosterone prescription without working on everything else as well. Because I just see it time and again, when you support the adrenals, when you support the vata, when you decrease the stress on the nervous system, the hormones just take off. And it's like what you said earlier, you're not going to want to procreate if your body is in a state of fight and flight. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, it absolutely doesn't. It's really interesting, that connection with the nervous system nourishing the sex. And, so much of the fight or flight or the nervous system dysregulation that we have is actually self-created. Like, it's very rare that we actually really need to be as stressed out about things as we are. And interestingly, sex and intimacy is like such a great antidote for stress. Like, in my work and in my book, I talk about restorative intimacy, like how, connecting with another person in a sensual or sexual or just, even like platonically intimate environment can actually be really healing and restorative for you. And so many of us are so stressed out and we're like, I'm too stressed to have sex. Like, it's like the last thing on my mind, the last thing I want to do right now. I'm so stressed out. When in reality, if we like leaned into stress, leaned into sex as like a deep tissue massage for our stress, then and had that release, we would probably feel a lot better in the end. Like dropping into your body, experiencing pleasure, like it's such a, to me, like connecting in that way, if you can really lean in and again treat it like a deep tissue massage, that yeah, you're stressed out and it might be a little crunchy at first getting into like the intimate space, but if you can just surrender and trust that on the other side you're going to have this like relaxation, you're going to have this, you're going to create space in your system to relax. So it's interesting how those like are paired. And yeah, anyways.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think of it as like a two-way highway, the body's informing the mind and the mind's informing the body. And so if you're less stressed, you're more likely to be more orgasmic, and it goes both ways. And so, and then I love what you said about deep tissue massage. There's a Taoist book that actually maps the whole body to the penis and vagina. And so it is like the deepest tissue massage.
Yep, exactly. Hello, lovers. Please bear with me for a brief interruption with a vulnerable share and offer from my heart. So when I first began my journey with spiritual intimacy and sacred sexuality, all I could afford were books and free podcasts. I was just out of college in my early 20s and honestly very, very broke. And I'm so grateful for all the complimentary, kind words and affordable wisdom that have gotten me where I am today. Price shouldn't deter you from healing. It shouldn't deter you from living the life you love or from reclaiming the most powerful energy in your body. It's my belief that time and commitment are also very powerful investments, especially when you're just dipping your toes in the water. You'll know when it's time to make the bigger cash investments in your journey, but let's begin together today with free love from my heart to yours. As you've already discovered, this podcast is free and it includes so much life-changing wisdom, but I'd also love to guide you to some free offers that are on my website, including a downloadable sexual shadow work workbook and a pleasure positive meditation. Both of these resources are amazing places to start in integrating the tantric principles of expansion and liberation into your life. And you can access these at www.talktantratome.com /free or find a direct link in the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode. Okay, so we talked about so with men, you said that the number one thing with men is really being conscious of their belly fat, taking care of themselves holistically, building the muscle. That's going to organically, generally bring them into a higher testosterone place. And it's going to lead to just overall better health and better sex, it sounds like. So what is the number one thing that you would say for women?
For women, I would say there are some parallels. So adrenal support is probably the most important because most women don't have enough progesterone and they're in an estrogen dominant state, which leads to a whole slew of other problems. From the lowest end of the spectrum would be PMS, but then on the higher end of the spectrum is breast cysts, ovarian cysts, endometriosis, and even cancer. And so again, we go back to the nervous system because the adrenals make progesterone, and there's a phenomenon that's kind of called cortisol steal, where essentially when you're in a state of elevated stress, you shunt your sex hormone production and make more cortisol instead. And so you're not making enough of the rest and digest hormone for women, which would be progesterone. And so then you're going to create this estrogen dominant state. And that state is also created by gut dysfunction. So when you've got a microbial imbalance in the gut, when there's things are growing in there that shouldn't be there, they don't allow you to eliminate estrogen well. And the liver is also responsible for estrogen detoxification. So I would say for women, it's a combination of poor adrenal health and improper detoxification pathways, because it's that estrogen that's meant for elimination that doesn't get eliminated properly that actually is the more harmful estrogen that can create all these other things, including make you more at risk for female cancers.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the adrenal support it sounds like is the main thing here, similar to men, but different. And I love the speaking of the hormone piece. One thing that's been so beneficial for me is understanding to eat with my cycle. And, there are times in the cycle where you actually do need more carbohydrates and the bread and the starchy, vegetables and grain to produce the progesterone. Otherwise, you're going to have the cramps and the bad periods. And that was so game changing for me. Is that something that you talk deeply about in the book? I know you speak about it a little bit, but.
Yeah, I share about the menstrual cycle and kind of being in rhythm with the cycle. And I guess most importantly is, the sacred pause at the end of the cycle and really kind of tapping into that for your wisdom and healing, but also for everyone around you. So that's where that shows up, but I don't go in depth in terms of, I think there's some really great books out there that have been dedicated to that one topic of how to eat and plan your life and exercise according to your menstrual cycle. The lens that I approach it from is more of the adrenal piece, the sacred menstrual pause, and then getting into some of the pathologies that can develop and how to treat them.
What would you say to women that feel like taking that pause just feels impossible with their life? What would you say to those women?
I think that there's probably room for a 5% shift, even if it's not doing everything perfectly and being a hermit for 1 to 3 days. I think that at a minimum, you could not do aggressive exercise during that time. There are some conscious choices you can make that will have a big impact. And, scheduling your more social activities, not on that day. Try not to go swimming that day or get into cold bodies of water. There are some mindful practices that you can do that even the week leading up to it. And I share in the book that I'm not sure if you got to that case with endometriosis, but it was just such a miraculous shift for this woman with simple things. where she came in with the level of pain that was taking her to the ER and getting all kinds of tests. And after, I think, 10 days of implementing the guidelines I shared, she had a menstrual cycle that was completely pain-free. And essentially what I shared was from the Ayurvedic lens of looking at it as a vata condition. Vata is often related to pain. And the things that balance out vata are warm, cooked, soupy things. So the week before her menses, she essentially followed my guidelines to have only warm food, only cooked food, soupy things, warm drinks, and just kind of chill out a bit and not go for, runs and swims and that kind of thing. And that was all she did. Seriously, that was all she did. And then she was like, okay, I don't need to work with you anymore. I'm healed, and so she actually didn't come back, which is my goal. Like, I'm really excited when that happens. And I love seeing how simple changes can make a huge difference. So to the woman who says she doesn't have time to take a pause, there are still things you can do if you just understand the impact that simple things, if you know what those are, can have such a huge outcome in terms of how you go through your cycle and how you feel after your cycle and what medical diagnoses develop later. And I think that's the beauty, is understanding the simplicity and sharing the simplicity, because it's not hard. I'm not doing rocket science to like transform people's lives, and just like really focusing in on the things that matter.
Yeah, I love that. Just really focusing in on the things that matter. The things that are going to shift the needle the most are oftentimes don't take that much more effort. It's like you're going to eat anyway, so you might as well eat something that's going to be, really nourishing for your body. And there's so many different resources out there to make that happen. So it's just like really just bringing in a little bit more mindfulness. In some ways, it's not always doesn't always mean more work or shifting your schedule around in a super insane way. And then there's also the fact that, if you feel like you don't have time for the pause or time to follow the special diet or whatever, it's like, but you do have time to be in pain or to take this, extra visit to the Western doctor. It's like, if you can solve this issue now for like the next 10 years, what is that worth to you? You know? And even if you're not in a place where you're like, there's so many signs that we get before we're at the place that it sounds like this one woman was at, where she's, actually going to the ER. There's so many signs, and you could be shifting yourself onto such a healthier trajectory by getting curious when you have those first warnings that something is off.
That's so true. And you may have heard this before, but the period, the menses, is like a monthly report card of how you did all month with your diet and your lifestyle and your stress levels. And so if you take that report card and you look at the signs that it's telling you just with that one cycle, you and do things to shift it the following months, you probably won't get into the situation where you end up in the ER.
Yeah. So you mentioned with the adrenals, it's really that's an important piece. What can we do to support the adrenals besides lowering our stress?
Yeah, and that's such an interesting question, because stress naturally lowers when you support the adrenals. And so adaptogens are kind of the number one thing to support your adrenals in terms of things that you can actually take and ingest. Of course, there's other practices like breath work. The gentle alternate nostril breathing is amazing. But I would say my favorite herb is ashwagandha taken as a tincture. Um, when you take a powerful form of something, and a tincture is powerful because it's been potently extracted, it's not just the ground up herb. But when you take a tincture like that, and it's got the subtle qualities too, it penetrates more deeply. Patients notice almost within a few days that they're feeling different. And it's not addictive because it's working to heal. It's working to heal the adrenals. So typically I'll recommend it for about 3 months. And that's the rough amount of time that it takes to heal the adrenals. taken more regularly, and then it can be used as needed. I don't use that in everybody because it actually isn't the best for women who have higher testosterone levels because it can increase testosterone. It's got a virilizing quality according to Ayurveda. It helps men more. So there are other options for women like holy basil, tulsi is one of my other favorites. And so I would say adaptogenic herbs and using potent forms of single herbs is the best.
I love holy basil. I used to have this holy basil and rose tea. You've probably seen it.
Yeah,
Yes.
organic India.
Yep. Yep. For those listening, the holy basil and rose tea is so good. I went through a really stressful period, and the homeopath that I was working with suggests I drink that. So it's always in my cabinet. I don't drink it as regularly anymore, but I do. I have been taking an ashwagandha tincture for the last couple of weeks because the summer was big and stressful, and I also really so. Anyways, that's been really great. It's my first time taking it as a tincture though, but I've been really enjoying it. And I also like the tinctures because it feels like more ritualistic to me than like taking a pill. It has like a sexiness to it. Um, and what else do I like about it? I was gonna say something else, but I don't remember. Oh, you also don't have to take like swallow the pill. Like you can just mix it in with your drinks or taste it, and it's nice.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's a great herb when you're traveling and when you're
Mm-hmm.
launching a book and going through all the big life events and, traveling so much for your book and everything. That sounds perfect.
Yeah, I love to like take my little ashwagandha tincture. I'm on the plane and I'm like making my own little drink and like da da. So
When you think about the three major food categories that stress out the adrenals, they're coffee, or most caffeine, but coffee especially, alcohol, and sugar. And so when these days there's so many alternatives to those things that you can actually add adaptogens to. And I know you have that coffee, the rasa coffee that has the adaptogens added back, and there's other variations of that, mocktails that have adaptogens in them. And so I think it's really beautiful that now there's so much more awareness of the adrenal food stressors, that there's actually been so many amazing brands created around ways to balance it out with the thing that does the best to balance it out.
I'm curious if you know, this is unrelated, but I'm like, one thing that I've started having instead of like a glass of wine is I'll have THC drops. Is there any like thing I should be worried about with that? Like I see a lot of people that are like doing the THC gummies to go to sleep, the THC drops, things like that. I'm curious if there's anything that one should be worried about with like overdoing it with some of this stuff, especially the THC.
There is something called THC psychosis, which is essentially when you take too much THC, it actually leads to anxiety. So, so I have seen that in some patients where they were just doing CBD, but it had, trace amounts of THC, but they were doing a lot of it. And it's not like you can just take something good and take enormous amounts of it and be okay. Most of the time, it really is fine tuned to your body, but also the quantity matters. And so she was doing it to kind of calm down. But it ended up having a rebound effect of extreme anxiety. And I was like, well, I think we need to take the CBD out, or at least lower it. And she got better. And so it's a phenomenon. We've tested on it on medical boards. It is a thing that that you can have some rebound anxiety pretty bad. And I say rebound not as in like when it wears off, but more as in if you take too much.
Oh, that's so interesting. Because I mean, so many people take the THC stuff to reduce stress, but it sounds like you might get that immediate like reduction or that more immediate like regulation that comes from ingesting, but then over time it can add up. And then when you're not on it, it makes you more anxious. And then you're like, oh, I need more THC. Is that the relationship?
It's more so if you take too much of it, not that it's cumulative over time, but if you take too much too regularly, you can end up anxious.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Fascinating. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to bring forth about your book? Anything that you think especially Tantra, shamanic sexuality peeps would like or otherwise?
Yes. So, one of the themes that was developing in the book that I just let it develop throughout each chapter is essentially how disease is disconnection from your dharma.
Mm,
And so something really fun that I do in each chapter is relate that concept back to each tissue. And I think it's important for our group here today, because when you're really activated in your sensuality and sexuality, you live a very purposeful life. And it's almost like a marker of health, right? To be inspired and wanting to overflow and share. And I think you're such a beautiful example of that. Like, I think you just embody that fully. A woman who's activated sensually and sexually in her dharma. And so I want to share with the listeners today that that's what's possible when you're healthy. Like, it's the most natural outcome of being in balance in your body and mind, is for your spirit to be able to play in the joy that it is in the body that it has, in a way that's purposeful, in a way that highlights your unique gifts that only you have, so that you can offer those to the world in joy, in service, not in work.
Yeah.
Where your work is your joy. And I think that was my deepest desire in writing the book, is to bring that awareness forward, that is what's possible with a healthy body and mind. It's a life really well lived, really well enjoyed, and really well in service to you and others, and they're one and the same. And so yes, that's what I wanted to share. And as you know, I love cooking. So I have, over the years, worked with patients through gut healing programs, and created a gut healing recipe book that I offer as a free download for anybody that purchases the book in the first week. They get my gut healing recipes for free. So I wanted to be able to share that too.
Oh, yum. Okay, so I've had quite a bit of Nisha's cooking and it's so good. Like it's so lovely to know that anything that I eat of Nisha's is going to be delicious, and it's also going to be nourishing and healing for my body. So, what a great bonus to get a bunch of delicious Ayurvedic recipes that will just kickstart the healing. That's amazing.
Yes.
They can get the book on Amazon. What's the release date?
September 6th.
Okay, amazing. So very soon, very soon. That's so exciting. Okay, great. Well, definitely order on Amazon. Get that free bonus. All the links will be in the show notes. Thank you again, Nisha, for joining me today. And I also want to express my gratitude to the listener. Thank you for opening yourself up to this beautiful conversation of sacredness, with so much gratitude and love. Have a sexy and spiritual day. And I'll catch you next week on Talk Tantra to Me. Ta-ta. Oops, just kidding. Still here. I have one last thing for y'all. I want to say that the internet is a really, really special place. It's why we're all here right now. And many of us, including me, wouldn't have discovered Tantra or sacred sexuality if it weren't for this nifty invention of the 20th century. And almost none of you would have found my work and my vision without it. I love the internet, and I deeply desire to expand beyond it, to experience more real life love, community, and connection. So I invite you to check out upcoming Tantra events at www.talktantratome.com/events, or click the link in the show notes. I can't wait to give you a big squeeze in real life. Okay, now that's it. Ta-ta for real. Ta-ta.